Hello everybody, welcome to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be covering what you need to get started in real estate photography. As this is probably the first time you've seen any of my videos, because it's the first video, my name's Adam, I am a photographer and videographer, and I shoot weddings, events and real estate photography. So now the formalities are out of the way and we've been properly introduced, let's get on with the video. I am going to be breaking this video down into 4 main sections, so feel free to skip across if you need to. Section number 1 will be the equipment that you need to get started. Section number 2 will be the techniques of how you actually go about shooting real estate. Section number 3 will be how you edit those photos once you get them back into Lightroom or your editor of choice. And then section number 4 will be any tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way that may just help you out on your first real estate shoot. Let's talk equipment then. So all you really need, being honest, to start off is a camera, obviously, a tripod, and the widest angle lens that you have or that you can afford. How important is that equipment, and do you have to spend a lot of money on it? Not really, to be fair. I think even the most basic level tripod on Amazon should be more than enough to get you started. And same with the camera really, the most entry level DSLR should be more than enough to get you started in real estate. The biggest one out of the 3 I would say, or the most important, is probably the wide angle lens. If your lens isn't wide enough to start with, you're going to end up taking multiple shots and trying to stitch them together, which can be okay and can work, you know, but it's not as good as having a nice wide field of view in one shot. We'll get on to a little bit more in the next section, but when you're taking multiple shots and stitching them together, sometimes getting your lines to match up and things like that can be a little bit difficult. But yeah, if it was me and I was starting out, the thing that I'd prioritise is the wide angle lens, and then you can always build up your other gear from there. While we are talking about gear, there are a few honourable mentions like lighting and drones. Now, these are things I'll be covering in another video, but essentially, yeah, there is more stuff that you can add to your kit bag, but in terms of what you need to get started, no. You don't need a drone, you don't need off-camera flash, and you don't need extra lights. They're lovely to have, but they're not essential to get you started. The first thing is shooting from the corner, or shooting corner to corner. Now, these will give you the shots that you'll see on most estate agent websites. The reason you're shooting from the corner is because you want to show as much of the room as possible, and usually you'll shoot opposite corners because you want to show the other side of where you've just shot from. Now, it might not always be possible to shoot sort of opposite corners, and you don't really have to. As long as you can show as much of the room as possible, that's kind of what you're after. Next thing to consider once you've got your tripod all set up is to make sure your camera is perfectly level. The reason this is important is because, especially on a wide angle lens, you can see some bowing or like sort of arching on window frames and door frames that we know to our eye should be perfectly straight. Most cameras will come with an electronic level built in as part of the camera. Usually you just have to dig around in the settings and kind of turn it on, and it usually comes in 2 settings. So you'll have one level that will tell you that your camera is straight from a kind of left and right point of view, and then you'll also have another level that will tell you that your camera is straight looking forwards and not pointed down or pointed upwards. So yeah, make sure that your camera is level. And also, don't forget, every time you move your tripod, you're going to have to re-level your camera. So even if it's the same room and you're just going from one corner to the other, my bet is it's going to be the other corner still going to be on level, so you're going to have to re-level every single time. Once your camera's all leveled off and good to go, let's talk about exposure bracketing. Now, if you're not sure what exposure bracketing is, essentially you're telling your camera to take 3, 5 or 7 different shots all at the same time with different levels of brightness that you can then blend together later in post-processing. Why might you need to do this? There are plenty of occasions that I'm sure you'll come across where the room is a little bit dark but the window is a little bit bright, and it's impossible in one photo to perfectly expose for both areas. With exposure bracketing, your camera will take one perfectly exposed shot, and then depending on how many you tell it to, how many you set your exposure bracket to, I like to use 5, it will take one perfectly exposed, one a bit darker, one a lot darker, one a bit brighter, one a lot brighter, and then I can merge those together afterwards and get a nice balanced image at the end of it. Just a quick side note on that, even with an exposure bracket where you've blended together light and dark photos, sometimes it's not always possible to save every bit of detail out of the window, and that's okay. For me, the main priority is to show the room, so I'd always make sure that when I'm editing afterwards, even when I've blended the photos together, the priority is making the room look sort of nice and bright and airy, and if I do lose a little bit of detail in the window, then that's fine. If there is a really nice view, for example, out of the window that you wanted to show, you could always do that as a separate photo, you know, set up your tripod, shoot out of the window and expose for the outside. That is most definitely an option. But for me, always make sure that you prioritise the actual room itself. Last thing you need to do once your exposure bracketing is all set up is turn on the self timer. Now, it doesn't really matter, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, but you will need some sort of self timer, or if you're fortunate enough to have one, you can control your camera from your phone or from a remote. The reason that you're going to need something like this is the shutter speed of your camera is going to be quite slow to let as much light in as possible, especially when you're doing exposure bracketing. So what you don't want to do is add motion blur because of camera shake when you press the button. So if you've got the ability to control your camera from your phone, great. Easiest thing to do, being completely honest, just set a 2-second timer, you press your shutter button, move out the way obviously, and let it do its thing. Okay, so you have taken all of your perfectly leveled corner to corner exposure bracketed shots. What do you do with them? Let's jump into the computer and I'll show you how to merge them all together. So this is what it looks like when you open up your photos and import them into Lightroom. This is what your bracketed photos look like. As you can see, you've got it's essentially the same photo 5 times with different levels of exposure. And just to kind of show you what that looks like, I'll use this one because it's got a window in, so it's a good example. This is what it would have looked like if your camera, if you'd have only took one picture. This is your camera's correct exposure, a balanced exposure. If we jump across to the extreme 2 stops brightness, the room looks nice and bright, window detail completely lost. Jump across, obviously now you can see the opposite, the room's really dark. This is our 2-stop underexposure, but the window light is, or the window detail, sorry, is maintained. Now let's jump back out. As I mentioned to you before, I do a 5-stop exposure bracket, which is why you can see five shots for every room, or every angle I should say. Before we edit a photo, a couple of things we need to do. First one is we need to stack all these together. So highlight all of your photos, come down to stacking, auto stack by time capture. 5 seconds is a good benchmark. It doesn't usually take longer than 5 seconds to take an exposure bracket, so stacking them all by shots that have been taken within 5 seconds is usually good enough. Click on stack, and the first thing you'll notice now is all of those 5-shot exposures have been neatly stacked into little piles for us. If you wanted to see your original photos, if you click on the little stack there, you can see your photos are all still there. They're just stacked on top of each other now like that. Next thing we need to do before we edit a photo is if you come all the way down and find your last group of photos that are stacked together, which will be this one here, as you notice, these photos from here on in haven't got the little number and stack sign in the corner because these are just single shots and these don't need to be merged, so you don't need to select those. So that's the last one in the stacked groups. Come back up to the top, shift and click. So now all I've done is selected only the photos that need merging, which is just the stacked ones. Okay, right click, photo merge and HDR. Now I'm not going to click to do that because I don't want to merge all of these together because it will take quite a while to do that. So just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to pick two photos. I'll pick that one and I'll pick that one. Same process, photo merge HDR. What you'll see is this little progress bar in the top left corner. Now when you do it and you've selected all of your stacks that you're going to merge, there'll be like 36, 40 or however many stacks that you've got, sort of progress bars all at the top there. That's a good time to go and get yourself a cup of tea, put the kettle on. By the time you've come back, they'll all be stacked and ready to go for you. There you go. As you can see, the first one, that's now done. The 5 has changed to 6, and that is because you've got your 5 original bracket photos, and now you've got your 6th photo is your blended HDR picture. Put those back to normal, and that's coming to the end now. So there you go. You can see that's finished as well. So let's jump into the develop tab, and let's go through how we would edit this photo. So first things first, you can see Lightroom has made some adjustments over here in the process of blending it together, and although that might be close to being usable, there's still a couple of tweaks that we like to make. First is, let's scroll down and find the lens correction section. Now because I'm using such a wide angle lens, there's a couple of traits that come with wide angle lenses that you can't really do anything about. So the first one is vignetting, so you get a little bit of a darkness around the edges and the corners of your frame. It's more pronounced on some wide angle lenses than others. The second thing that you normally get is what's called like pincushion distortion, where the center of the frame can either look bulged out or sucked in depending on the level of pincushioning. So I haven't got an actual lens correction profile for my lens. I've got a 9mm Laowa, but there is a Sigma profile that works really well for my lens, and that is the Sigma, not the fisheye ones, that's it, the 8-16. There you go. So if I just toggle that on and off just for a sec, you can see first of all the middle of the frame, how that kind of moves around. That's what I mean by the pincushion distortion. And then you can also see, if I come and have a little close look in the corner, there you go, you can see what it does to that vignetting, and it kind of automatically corrects that for you. So once that's done, next thing I like to do is just come up to the crop section, and I like to just auto straighten that. Now I know that we spent some time getting all of our levels correct on top of the tripod, but your camera's automatic level still has a little bit of latitude where it might be just ever so slightly off. So all of this does is it just makes sure that our lines are definitely straight, and you can see by that the corner of the room there, that line is nice and straight now. So it's not a lot either, you can see that it's corrected. Right then, once we've done that, the next thing I like to do, although Lightroom does a fairly good job of getting a nice balanced exposure, I always think, personal opinion, that real estate photography looks better a little bit brighter. So most rooms look better nice and bright and airy. Nobody wants to go and view a house where the rooms look
dark and dingy. Again, just my personal opinion. So I like to get them nice and bright and bump up that exposure a bit. Now as you can see, the window has darkened down a little bit, so I'm just going to pull the highlights down, and you can see we still managed to save some detail in the window. My preference or my priority is always the look of the room over what's going on outside of the window. So if there is a particularly nice view, then you can, set up your tripod and look out of the window and expose for outside, but generally the priority is making the room nice and bright and airy, and if that means that you can't retain any window light, so be it, or any window detail, sorry, so be it. In this occasion, obviously we can, and I'm fairly happy with how that's looking. Lines are nice and straight, it's nice and bright. I'm fairly happy with that one. So on to the next one. Now before I jump across, I'm going to copy only the lens correction settings, so that is only that section. So because I know that our next photo was shot on the same lens and I'm going to have to apply the same corrections, it's easy just to copy and paste that across. Normally what I would do is, if all of these had been merged like I would I would copy one and paste the settings across all of them, or at least all of the stacked photos, because then they're all shot on the same lens and the same lens correction can be applied to all of them. Just saves you digging through the menu every time. Right then, same again, let's straighten it up a little bit. So as much as it does an okay job, still not massively happy with that there, so let's just tweak that just a touch. There you go. Whoops. I still think that needs another slight little tweak. Probably about there-ish. And I'd probably go about there for my composition. So we've corrected for the lens and we've just made sure we're definitely completely straight on our lines. Again, next thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of brightness like we did before. Now where this one's an interesting photo, I am going to drop down those highlights just to try and save some of that detail, but what you can see is this part of the image is nice and bright because you've got all that natural light spilling in from those glass doors and those windows, but this kind of third of the photo here is still a little bit on the darker side because obviously that light isn't bending around the corner. So a couple of things we can do for that. We can get those shadows raised a little bit, and while that's not too bad, I'd still like it just a little bit brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a linear gradient mask. There you go. And right, I'm going to bring it out to here just so I can get it to the shape and width that I want. And then I'm just going to drop that back to roughly about there. Now, just a bit of a bump in exposure, and the reason I don't want to go too nuts with it, I want to make it look sort of natural to the eye, so I'm just going to tweak it just a little bit so that looks sort of nice and bright like the rest of the photo. Could we go a bit more? Yeah, maybe that's a bit too much. There you go, tweak it to taste. Now, with that, again, I'm fairly happy with that, and I would call that pretty much done. Next thing I will show you is if you haven't got a wide angle lens and you have to take multiple photos from different angles and stitch them together, I can show you how to do that. what we have here is a recording of the back of my camera screen, just so you can see kind of like the settings and the process of the what you have to do to kind of stitch your photos together, like how to shoot in camera first. So as you can see, if I press play on this, you can see, let's pause it there, on the left hand side here, that's my exposure meter. So I'm still doing 5-shot brackets, and you can see there, that is my exposure for my perfectly exposed shot. And then you can see I'm going to take 1 shot and 2 shots over, and 1 shot and 2 shots under. What you can also see is my electronic level. And essentially what you're going to see me do now is I'm going to take a bracketed photo here. I'm then going to pan the camera to the right and take another bracketed photo and merge them together. So if I click play, there you go, that's the bracketing done. And then I'm going to move it along. That's our second lot of bracketing done. Okay, and back into Lightroom, and now you can see from the recording that you just saw, those are the 5 bracketed photos from the one angle, and then we move the camera to the right, and those are the 5 bracketed shots from the other angle. Now, very similarly to before, the way we're going to do it, we are still going to merge them in a HDR, so we get the best of both worlds from the multiple exposures, but we're also going to stitch them together to make one big photo. So again, we're going to select all, we're going to right click, but this time if we come down to photo merge and we click HDR panorama, then Lightroom is going to take it upon itself to merge them all together, not only from an exposure point of view, but it's also going to stitch them together to make one wide angle photo. That's a little preview of what it'll look like. So click on merge, you get a little progress bar. Once that's done, it'll spit out a blended image. Now again, I don't personally think this is a substitute for a good wide angle lens, but if you don't have access to a wide enough angle lens, or you're just in a really tight spot, this is an option. Some of the issues that you sometimes find if I punch in is you can see that curtain rail isn't straight, it's got like a bow to it, and so's the ceiling line there. Now we know they should be perfectly straight, but it looks like they've been taken with a GoPro, with that fisheye kind of distortion. But it's not too bad, and you know, you'd have to be pixel peeping maybe to notice it. The other thing, now it hasn't really happened on this photo, but the other thing that you can sometimes get is something that should be in a nice straight line, like that curtain pole. Sometimes it won't match the lines up quite as even as you'd like it to. The reason this one doesn't maybe look so bad, I think, is because we've only stitched 2 photos together. Now, I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, but if you were to take 4, 5 or 6 shots all in a row and try and stitch all those together, the more stitching that Lightroom's got to do, sometimes the results aren't maybe as good, and you've got more chance of getting those sort of not quite perfect lines matching up and things like that. But this is an option, like I was saying, if you are just starting out and you maybe haven't got access to an 8 or a 9mm wide angle lens, and you've got a 16 or a 20mm lens, this is an option.
And last but not least, here are some tips and tricks that I've picked up, and a couple of mistakes that I've made that I can share with you so that you don't have to. So the first one, let's get the mistakes out of the way. Don't leave things in the frame. I am absolutely embarrassed to admit that, yes, there has been more than one occasion where I have set up my tripod and taken the pictures, and then I've realised, oh, God's sake, there's a cup of coffee that the client has made for me that I've left on the side and not realised, or my light wand has been in the frame and I haven't realised. You've then, hopefully, if you notice at the time, you can remove them and shoot them again. If not, you've got to get pretty good in Photoshop and learn how to remove them. So yeah, make sure that you don't leave anything in the frame and that your frame is nice and clear, especially of your own stuff. Next thing is reflections. Speak for itself, but you'd be surprised how many times that you'll be standing behind your camera in the corner set up and you don't realise that you're in a reflection of a mirror, or if you're in the kitchen you'll be in the reflection of the cooker or something like that. Once you are set up and you're good to go and you're just about to press the shutter button, just make sure you do a quick look around in your frame, make sure there are no mirrors or anything that you're in the reflection of. One last tip, just to add a little bit of interest to your real estate photography, is, you know, especially when you're doing those detail shots, is to interact a little bit with your environment. For example, if the house that you're shooting has a really nice freestanding bath with the sort of waterfall kind of flowing taps, turn the taps on and get a detail shot of the water flowing off the taps. Stuff like that can just help to add a little bit of a different dimension and a little bit of interest to your photos. Right then guys, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for hanging around all the way till the end. If there is any questions at all, drop them down in the comments. Any ideas that you want to see for future videos, I do have some plans for a behind the scenes on a real estate shoot and more videos going into sort of different gear and different techniques and things like that. If you think that's something that you'd get value out of, drop me a like and a subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.